Good evening, everybody. I'm Ross Weaver. I'm back to do another Death Stranding 2 video this time. This one, I'm making it on the spur of the moment tonight. It's Thursday, August 8th. Right now it's 8:30 p.m. local time on the dot. And, about an hour and a half ago, I was just going to the bathroom. And as I was standing there relieving myself, I had this idea about what Death Stranding 2's story is going to look like and about some of the other stuff. Well, I'll get into it. Why Higgs is the way he is and what could possibly be going on with the Mexico reference. It just all of a sudden a big plan struck me in my head, and it all kind of makes sense. It makes so much sense that I am literally an hour and a half later sitting down. I've written a bunch of notes out, and I'm gonna just bang this video out, and we'll see how it goes. So this is highly unplanned, very impromptu. I apologize if I'm a little spacey, because I literally just had this idea and I'm trying to figure it out, But I think I've got it here, kind of in a sort of readable format. We'll see. So let me just get into it. We'll figure it out along the way. The big idea that I have about Death Stranding's story is it's related to the Phantom Pain. It's all related to the Phantom Pain, and I'll get back to it at the end. But it's basically these 9 years that we've lost in the Phantom Pain, the 75 to 84 stuff. I think that's what's gonna kind of be the overarching structure of Death Stranding 2's story. It's not necessarily going to be 100% of a replay of that, but it's going to be kind of based on that. And I think there's going to be some elements that are there and remixed a little bit, but it's all mostly the same elements. And the stuff that's sort of like not supposed to be there has story stuff going on. Like I said, we'll get to it all. But the general idea is that we're going to go back to Afghanistan and Africa. And we've already kind of heard a reference to Afghanistan in the trailers about Mexico. And it sounded like Fragile was talking to Sam about how Mexico was somehow in the past and they're going to do something else. And I'm wondering if that's going to take place in the second half of the game when we're starting our sort of Africa portion. But I don't think it's actually going to be in Africa. Let's just get to it. The Mexico portion, if you think about, we've started in America, it makes sense that we're probably going to take the chiral network to the south. We're going to take it to where most of the extra land is. We're going to go down through Mexico probably. And that'll probably be our metaphorical Afghanistan. That'll be our first 12 missions of the Phantom Pain. So that'll be a lot of the same stuff that, we'll get into it more in detail, but this is basically George's campaign that I've been talking about in my Metal Gear Solid V Explained Lecture Series. It's sort of a mirror of Frank's campaign. It's also Ricardo's campaign, which it's a mirror of the original version of it. So the original version of it took place out in the Caribbean, in the sea, and then it went over to Africa, and then it went into our metaphorical Afghanistan, which was really, I was saying it's Iraq. And that's sort of that's Frank's original version of what happened from 75 to 84 in the Phantom Pain that I've been talking about in my lecture series. And if you don't know anything about the Metal Gear Solid V stuff, it's just, this is what I'm basing it all off of. So if you want to go learn more about it, I've done tons of lectures and lots of video about it. But it's just stuff from that game, so you kind of have to know it to get what I'm saying here. So if you don't, I apologize. But just let me keep going here. So like I said, Frank's campaign was kind of like he started in the Caribbean, and then it kind of took off and went to Africa, and then kind of his metaphorical Afghanistan. And when we play it, we start in Afghanistan in the Phantom Pain, and then we go to Africa. And then after that, there's a bunch of like swapping back and forth, and it gets kind of confusing, And I explained that by saying George's campaign is kind of going on behind the scenes, or sort of parallel to ours, after Mission 30 at least. And so we're kind of playing the both sides of it as Venom Snake, and Venom's kind of both the original Venom and the George Venom. And I'm saying the original Venom is Chico. We're going to get back to Chico, though. And so in MGSV, like I said, we start in Afghanistan, and then we go to Africa. And I think we're kind of going to parallel that in Death Stranding too, basically. We're going to start in a sort of metaphorical Afghanistan, and then we're going to move to a metaphorical Africa. So if the metaphorical Afghanistan is Mexico, well, further south of that, what's the metaphorical Africa? The jungles of the Amazon. It's got to be. There may be also some outlying regions. Maybe we'll go over the entire continent of South America, and so we'll get maybe some of the mountains on the western coast. Maybe we'll get some of that stuff going on. That could explain how we see a lot of those snow-capped mountains in those trailers. That could be, I think it's the Andes. Is that? So yeah, the Andes, the Amazon, all of the stuff in South America might be our sort of metaphorical Africa, which also kind of makes sense from a Death Stranding historio kind of perspective, or historio-temporal perspective. The Pangea theory, or the Pangea theory, I think it's Pangea though, says that Africa and South America used to be one continent. They used to be joined, in that kind of horn, that kind of elbow missing out of Africa is South America, basically. That little tip in South America and Brazil is kind of fits. Well, there's been erosion and degradation and coastline changes and stuff like that, but the plates kind of roughly fit together. And that's all based off of tectonic drift and tectonic plate theory and all that kind of stuff. So it kind of makes sense for South Africa, or I'm sorry, I keep wanting to say South Africa because I have Africa on my mind, and Outer Heaven being in South Africa. We're going to get there, though. I'll get back to it. But South America is, probably going to be our metaphorical second area. And I'll get to it more when I get to the gameplay stuff. But I think we're going to have 2 playable AOs in Death Stranding 2. In Death Stranding 1, we had 1 big playable area. Well, I'll get to it. There's probably going to be 2 and 2. Now, if we're doing this campaign in Africa, this sort of mirror of Rhodesia, or an echo of Rhodesia, maybe you could call it. Frank's campaign first is going after the child soldiers there, and all of Big Boss's schemes that he's making that I was talking about. He's making these drone soldiers, and he's making his little exoskeletons. I think this is basically what Higgs is doing. I think Higgs is kind of our Big Boss's phantom that we're chasing. He's also kind of Eli in a way, if we're Big Boss in a way, and he's kind of causing problems for us out there. It's kind of like he's Eli before we bring Eli in, essentially. The Eli in the Phantom Pain that's like pre-mission 23, and then. So if Higgs is our Eli, kind of, sort of, the Eli out in the field, like I said, he's also Big Boss's Phantom. Well, he's also Raiden. And I haven't really... That's going to be the subject of a next big video that I'm getting at, You Don't Know Jack. Linking Jack Raiden to, well, let's say his past. And how the Eli stuff... from Jack's... Well, so Raiden's past being Solidus's, sort of Eli... And the Phantom Pain, as I was kind of theorizing that, kind of providing context for all their Metal Gear Solid 2 story and all the backstory of that being kind of metaphorically told in the Phantom Pain. I think that's going to come up again. I think Higgs is kind of taking that as his own story. The way that Higgs is kind of trapped on the beach and he's remotely operating these bots is kind of the way I've been saying that Raiden is trapped within Arsenal Gear, essentially, in kind of a prison. And he's only allowed to use a robotic body to kind of go out and do stuff, while his real biological head is kind of elsewhere. Higgs has kind of swapped that up. Since his whole body is on the beach, he's using the head as his remote connection out in the world, you see. And he's got it attached to a body, which I'm going to get into that more in my You Don't Know Jack video, but there's a lot of history of, I think, basically what happened to Solidus's Eli was Raiden, and I think essentially he was beheaded and had his head put onto a robotic body. I don't think that happened while he was a child, though. I think that happened before he was a child, that's how you connect it back to the Big Boss Jack, Naked Snake Jack. That's a whole other video, and I'm kind of spoiling it here, but we got to talk about it because it's coming. and I don't have the You Don't Know Jack video. The script is done for that one, pretty much, but I just haven't shot it yet. I'm kind of like trying to figure out how I want to shoot it, so I haven't got it done totally yet. But that one should be coming in the next month or maybe two. We'll see. Anyways, so Higgs is our kind of ghost of Big Boss, that he's doing the same stuff that Big Boss did in Rhodesia, at least that I was saying he did in Rhodesia. And I'll get into it more kind of as I go on, but let's just keep going with the kind of general overview of the story so we can get all these elements covered and then dive in. If Higgs is out there in Mexico, and actually I think we're actually going to chase him down in Mexico first, and then we're going to have to do our stuff in the Amazon, which will be sort of where he's got the guy who's his code talker, essentially. We'll get to it here in a sec. But we're going to do like a Mexico campaign, and then we're going to do, an Africa campaign, an Amazon campaign. And so the Magellan's kind of our mother base. The Magellan is kind of, the way I've been saying that Frank was making these mother bases all over the world to chase after Big Boss's schemes. I think the Magellan is kind of our stand-in for all those bases. And so to extend that, if the Magellan is our base, then all the people who are on the Magellan have to be people who are on the base in the Phantom Pain. And so the first one I got to talk about is Elle. She's Eli. She's our new Eli. She's the blonde-headed kid who's running around and has got some issues. But she's not just Eli, because like I said, Higgs is kind of Eli too. And this is, I think, kind of the link between, maybe some kind of a hidden link between Elle's character and Higgs. But I also think, since Elle's, not just the only one who's Eli, and Higgs is also kind of Eli out in the field, and Elle is kind of Eli after we've brought Eli onto our base. And I'll get to, there's a reason why that happens that way here in just a sec. But if you notice, if you go back to the previous trailer, her character never speaks. She doesn't say a word. So she's quiet. And she's also like the Hamid survivor. She's also kind of like Roy Campbell. But the real cause on the Magellan is really Fragile. Fragile is our new commander, and the commander on the base, on Mother Base in the Phantom Pain, is Kaz. So the way I was saying Kaz kind of was in the past Roy Campbell, but is kind of someone new now, that's Fragile. So Elle's character might have more relations to Fragile than she might have to Sam, is what I'm getting at. There may be some kind of a hidden twist here with Elle's character, and it's some kind of a misdirect where we think Elle is BB, is Luis, and maybe she's not. Or maybe she is, I don't know. There may be complications, I'm not sure. But the way Fragile is the one that's kind of shown having the emotional connection to her in the trailer, the way I thought about that, when in the opening, when they see the suckers on her arm, Fragile's the one who sees that and has all the big emotional reaction to it. Sam's not there, And it kind of makes sense to me. If you're a storyteller and you want to show, this guy's daughter being brought back, you want to see his emotional reaction, right? That's just basic storytelling. So the fact that he's showing us Fragile's emotional reaction to Elle kind of hints to me that there's maybe more of a connection between Fragile and Elle. And we do know that Fragile was the one who was with Luis when she was shot, and so there's a connection there. But I'll circle back to it here in a little bit. There may be more going on there that meets the eye. But Elle being kind of like quiet and not speaking also kind of likens her to Paz, and sort of in the Phantom Pain, the Paz that we see in the game is a phantom. It's a self-made hallucination, right? And so that's why I'm thinking there's maybe some sort of self-made hallucinations that we have about Elle's character. Again, I don't think she is Luis. I think they're kind of baiting us into thinking that, and the more I'm pondering it, I'm like, it doesn't really jive to me that she is Luis. Maybe she's like someone linked to Luis, but like I said, I think she may be more linked to Fragile more than anything. And so let me go back to the Eli thing real quick, just to kind of bring the Elle as Eli and Fragile as Kaz thing together. If our Eli out on the base was kind of Higgs, right? He's kind of this troublemaker. And then after we deal with him, that's when we maybe get Elle on the ship. Maybe it doesn't happen early on, And so if it's like dealing with Higgs as our sort of dealing with Eli and he comes onto the base, why is L now Eli? Well, it's because of the Wolbachia. The Wolbachia has the effect of changing male to female. And so our male Eli becomes a female Eli. So, quiet as Chico, yet again. And this is why Kaz is fragile. Fragile is Kaz. Because Kaz was a man, and now Wolbachia. Kaz is a woman. Now, you can take that one as much as you want, but the whole Eli, Higgs is Eli off the base, and then Eli on the base is L, that's where I think the real Wolbachia male to female kind of context comes in. Again, this may be kind of related to maybe some kind of deception behind L's character. I kind of wonder if maybe Fragile didn't also have a baby in the past that she lost, and she has a connection to. Maybe that's how she has a connection to a beach at all, because it's never really been explained how Fragile has a beach that she can go jump to and explore and come back, That kind of seems like some stuff that everybody else has some kind of link to the beach related to birth or death, so it kind of implies to me that we're probably going to hear a lot more about Fragile's story in Death Stranding 2 as well. Okay, let's move on. The next topic that I've got written down here is, where's Code Talker? If our Code Talker is kind of, this guy that Big Boss is using, or Higgs is going to be using to do his schemes, well, there's kind of maybe two versions of him, I think. Kind of how I was saying Huey kind of is two people, and Code Talker's kind of linked to Huey, and kind of how there's this Huey is Sokolov, and there's also this Huey is Zero kind of duality going on. It may be that our Code Talker, while we're here on the base, is George, is really the pilot, the captain of the ship. He's kind of our old man. That kind of jives to me. He's kind of got an elderly appearance in the game, as George Miller does too. But it's obviously not exactly one-to-one George Miller. And if they wanted to make him a young George, I'm sure they could have. You see what I'm saying? So George being on the boat and being the old guy and being the captain of it, kind of, he's kind of a code talker, I think, But then that also, like I said, implies that there's this maybe other code talker that's out in the field that's working for Higgs, that's working with Higgs, maybe not necessarily for him. I think this is going to get into APAS and all of the bots stuff, and I'll get back to it here in a few more points. But I think that our other code talker that's going to be out in the Amazon, in the sort of the beyond the Devil's House, in the mansion out in the jungle, that's probably where we're headed in Death Stranding 2. And after we get this other code talker, again, that won't be the end of the story. There'll be a kind of a finale, which I'll get to here in a sec, but there's really a little third snippet that's going to be kind of the return to the desert. But we'll get to that. And so if there's a code talker, George, right? Captain George. If there's an Eli, who's kind of L. If there's a Kaz, who's kind of fragile. And there's kind of an Ocelot, who's kind of Higgs, and he's not really on our base, but, you can kind of think of him as Ocelot. It's Troy Baker's voice still, so. We've kind of got all the characters, except for Tretage. So who's Tretage? Well, I think this is why we have the Fatih Akin puppet here. I think this puppet, kind of is evocative of the way Mantis controls people, and it's as if this puppet is being controlled by someone like the way that Mantis controls a person. And this puppet, well, go back to what he says in the scene. He prefers the driver's seat. He doesn't want to be in the back. He prefers the driver's seat. Well, what does Tretage do in the Phantom Pain? He animates Sahelanthropus, really. And he pilots it in Hellbound. So he prefers the driver's seat. He's kind of driving it, right? And there's also kind of this implication that Sam himself is Sahelanthropus. And this little puppet is kind of like Eli. And he's kind of in the pilot's seat and he's driving it. And there's this disembodied spiritual connection to this driver. Okay, like when Eli's driving Sahelanthropus and is bonded with Mantis, you see what I'm saying? It's kind of the same formula. Eli is kind of this little puppet, Mantis is kind of somewhere. It's really this puppet's caw is what I am theorizing. Is there's a caw connected to the puppet on the beach, and Sam is kind of Sally. Sam is kind of our Metal Gear for this game. Okay, he's the weapon to surpass Metal Gear, technically. Okay, so yeah. Oh, and so back in that Afghanistan and Africa campaign, when it originally happened, there was no Trettich. He didn't get made until 1984, and I got into that in the timeline. And he's made in 84, and he's tracked down in 86 is when he's kind of irradiated and what's the word? Made unable to reproduce. I can't remember the word. But the fact that Trettich kind of wasn't there back then, I think is why this puppet and its caw, its spirit is kind of not here. It's on the beach. It's kind of not here yet in a way, but it's also kind of already dead, maybe in a way too. It's like Trettich just is kind of off the map, until the very end, which implies to me at the very end of the campaign, at the very end of the story, that doll is probably going to have a very big twist involved with it, if I'm right. Who that doll's cause connected to possibly is going to be a big twist. Okay? And, well, okay. Let me finish this off. Since Sam is like Sahelanthropus and Sally is like a robot, then Sam is like a robot. Okay? And also, Sam is kind of like our decoy in this game, in a way. If he's our player character and Venom was kind of a decoy, our player character in the Phantom Pain, well, Sam's kind of got to be a decoy in this game, in this plot's context somehow. I think that, the way that Fragile says that line about we never meant to lead you on, I think it's implying that this is relating to how they're maybe using him as a decoy, essentially. They're using him as bait, maybe. Maybe he doesn't realize, maybe he doesn't remember exactly why he's doing it too. Maybe he would have done it for his own, good reason. But essentially, I think that Sam being kind of like Sahelanthropus likens him to kind of these bots and these decoys. And so finally, the last thing that's going on in Afghanistan and in the Africa campaign that I've been talking about, well, if we've talked, Sam's also kind of frank too. I should have said that. But if we've got all these other characters out there, the one that I haven't talked about is Chico. The little demon Chico, the little bloody machete-wielding dude is going to be out there. I think that's why we have this samurai bot that shows up out of nowhere. I think this samurai bot is our Chico. And that's why I think this BB that I've talked about controlling this samurai bot is probably a male. It's probably another BB. That's not Luis. It's not a female human. It's a male human. Female. It's not a girl. It's a boy. Okay, I'm going to jump back to some of the gameplay stuff real quick, and then we're going to kind of just meander back into the story while I'm talking about the gameplay, because that's how these notes are written. But with all that said, we're going to be going out there and we're going to have this samurai Chico who's going after our big boss Higgs and hunting down all of his schemes and trying to stop him. And there's probably going to be a lot of conflict that we witness between the two of them that we can't really participate in ourselves, just like we saw in the trailer, right? And like I've been saying, kind of happened in the lectures, like how Big Boss was kind of like, we could fight him, but like, killing him and getting rid of him is kind of out of our grasp right now. I think that's what's going to go on during the Mexico campaign. Is Higgs is going to kind of be a constant nuisance, but also this samurai bot is going to keep showing up. This BB bot is going to keep showing up, and not necessarily is going to be on our side, but not necessarily is going to be going after us either. So, okay. So, anyways, back to the gameplay stuff. So, I talked about in the beginning of the video a little bit how Death Stranding kind of has one big playable area. There's the central region, and there's also the eastern region and the western, kind of the edge knot region. And those regions, you don't really, once you get to the end game, you don't really do a lot of your gameplay in those regions. You might go back to the eastern region here and there to do a bunch of stuff, but it's actually pretty easy to just totally knock out everything in that eastern region and get all the deliveries done and get, everything, gathered and all your connections leveled up, and just be done with it, and then spend most of your time in that central region when you're playing Death Stranding, even at the end game, and I think that, looking back at it, maybe it gets a little stale. It's one area, there's different regions in those areas, but they all kind of are similar in their geography and in their fauna, the flora and fauna at least. I guess there's no fauna. The fauna would be the BT, but the flora at least is all mostly the same, And I think they want to shake it up. So instead of just having another one big playable area in Death Stranding 2, it being a 2 game, I think they want to have 2 big playable areas of operations, area of operations, 2 big AOs. And so, like I said, I think the first one's going to be up in Mexico, and it's going to be kind of the desert regions, but there also might be some other regions that aren't desert, because we know there's, time falls happen and things have kind of changed. So maybe they can take a little authorial kind of, liberty with it and throw in some influences from some other areas elsewhere in the world. Kind of in the way that Death Stranding's first area, or all of its kind of stuff is really pulled from Iceland, but it's America, right? So it's like Iceland is the metaphorical geography for this new America. Well, if we're going to go into this Mexico literally, well, it might not literally look like Mexico. It might be Mexican kind of, geography. Well, I'm sorry, not Mexican geography, Mexican cartography superimposed on some other geography from some other region elsewhere in the world that kind of matches maybe Mexico a little bit, but maybe not is one-to-one with Mexico. You see what I'm saying? Might even be Iraq. I don't know. Maybe he's going to go to Iran. Maybe he's going to go to this other region that's neighboring Afghanistan that has been said to be the place where Selenoyarsk was, the place where Zanzibar land was, the place where the Gindra nation was in Ghost Babel. That might be kind of a place they're pulling from as well for this metaphorical Afghanistan, Mexico kind of area. And then the other area is going to be like, our metaphorical Africa, the Amazon. So it'll be a lot of jungles probably. There'll probably be quite a bit of aquatic stuff with, the rivers and everything going on there. The Amazonian River being such a big thing, and, something in my mind, I just popped into my brain, but thinking of all the rain context and all of the washing away of stuff that we saw in the trailer, maybe he'll pull some stuff from the Indus River Valley, from all the monsoon, areas that happen over in India. The Indus River just also being linked to humanity's past. So, and I already mentioned the Andes, and like I said, I think the Andes might not literally be the Andes again. It might be he's taking South American cartography and using other areas of the world to represent South America. But it's like as a way of saying it's changed over this time time period that's happened. And then also, this is Death Stranding's world, so it's sort of like it's not our world, But yeah, so that's the 2 playable AOs, Mexico and Amazon, yeah. Let's get back to the bots. So I've said, that Sam's kind of like a bot, and that Higgs is going to be out, in Mexico, kind of doing his schemes that I was saying Big Boss was doing, and what he was putting together in Africa that I was saying in my MGSV Explained lectures, and he takes it to Afghanistan is all of his drones and his bots and his next generation children soldiers, I think it's basically going to be next gen bots. It's going to be like, they've got AI capabilities. They're so real, but they're not going to be, they're not real AI, right? It's like it's going to be this claim of AI, but without all the substance to actually back up what a real AI would look like, And I think that's going to be what's kind of powering this new bot network that's going to be running through Mexico. And I think essentially we're going to have to go pull it up and override it with the chiral network. And essentially we're kind of competing with this other network, and we're saying that this one that y'all have bought, that this bot one that y'all have already paid for and everything is kind of a scam, is what we're gonna be kind of going in as drawbridges, saying you've been sold this scam network. Let us put a real good network in with this chiral network. And it's it's not like we're trying to expand the UCA or bridges. It's the chiral network only, right? And so I think that's what's going to be going on with these bots and drones and these next gen children, is they're going to be kind of this fake AI stuff running all of this bot network. And so going further with that, as I said, there's also exoskeletons, so that's probably what we can expect to face later in the game, is bots with armor, basically, and maybe also some human, mule or demons type characters that also have exoskeletons and armor that will need to use lethal stuff against them at first to, break their outer shell, and then we'll need to be real careful maybe and switch to non-lethal stuff to not kill the guy that's inside, kind of the way I was saying how there was these D-walkers that at first we see as just these mechanical, things that have no, animation, and they're, we can kind of just show up and destroy them with no consequence. And then later on, in the same place where we see the D-walkers, we'll see oftentimes multiple prisoners, like at Datati Abandoned Village, how there's footprints of phantoms, and then later on at I think it's On the Trail, there's a bunch of prisoners there, kind of implying that the people inside of those D-walkers and those exoskeletons were kind of we're kind of prisoners, kind of like the BB Corps are implied to be prisoners in a way, and so on and so forth. And the last part of the schemes, what did I say? Big Boss made a giant monkey Venom, kind of a giant monkey Chico, kind of a Gohan, kind of Saiyan monkey. And I think that's, if you've seen all of the leaks and all of the stuff that's been posted for Death Stranding 2, you've seen some screenshots of them in production with these giant-looking creatures that kind of look like they're dressed like the skulls from the Phantom Pain, and they're walking around these mountain ranges while some player character is hiding behind a small rock with some tents and other stuff nearby. I think that's South America and what's going to be going on down there. I think there's these new bioweapons that they've made, these nuclear weapons, and it's a giant. And yeah, so it's like that's the whole story, is we're going to be chasing down Higgs's guns and his little schemes, and his guns are kind of, his bots and literally his weapons and all of that kind of stuff. And his schemes is what's going to take us into the Amazon, into our metaphorical Africa, where we find his giants that he's been making. And I think he makes these giants out of BTs, essentially. I'm going to have to skip ahead. I think these giants come out of the parasite research stuff that I was talking about, and how I think essentially Higgs, how in Death Stranding 1 we've seen some BTs are normal size, and some of them are a little bit bigger, and some of them are even quite big. Well, and then there's also the giant BT that we have to fight with Higgs in Edge Knot City. I think that's his scheme. I think he's found a way to turn BTs into these giants and sort of cover them with something, some sort of like the one that covers the parasite. I think these parasite suits looking things that they have on, these giant suits, are kind of the product of some kind of BT related research that's been going on. And Higgs has somehow found a way to make giant BTs and armor them up with this covering, and we're going to have to go deal with them. Kind of a David versus Goliath. Well, Davids versus Goliaths, because it's two. It's plural. So yeah. And going further into that, how does he make them? Well, in the Phantom Pain, what was I talking about? The secret part of the recipe that Code Talker reveals to Skullface under duress is radiation, right? Now, I don't think it's going to be radiation in Death Stranding, but I think radiation being kind of metaphorically, coming from nuclear weapons and nuclear technology, and the giants being kind of related to the nukes, kind of implies that we're going to have a new kind of chiral contamination. That's some kind of a radiation. It's probably going to be an invisible chiral contamination. It's probably related to why there was that lensing effect that I talked about in my last video about Death Stranding 2, where the moon's huge. That's happening because of a lensing effect, because there's a bunch of invisible gas that's in the Earth's atmosphere that's magnifying the image of the moon a lot more than usual. Well, that's probably related to this chiral radiation. If I had to guess, it's probably some kind of, the chiralium in the Earth is evaporating or something. It's, it's seeping out or something like that. It's probably going to be, again, related to like the Bridgmanite or something like that. Some overly labored kind of geological explanation that goes into meteorological phenomenon and stuff like that, and stuff in the atmosphere and all that kind of stuff. That's probably what's going on here. It may even be related to how these bots are being controlled by Higgs, and the invisible kind of strands that I was talking about, the kind of fishing line looking things. So yeah, that's enough about the Giants and Higgs schemes and all of that. Let's go. So, I've said we've got this Afghanistan and Africa stuff, but there's also missions 29 or missions 28 and 29 are our final missions in Africa and the Phantom Pain, and then missions 30 and 31 are kind of the finale. They take place back in Afghanistan. Now, in the context of MGSV, when we go back to Afghanistan, it's in a part of Afghanistan we haven't been to since Mission 12, basically. Like, it was a part of Afghanistan we went to a couple of places there and did some stuff, and then we kind of left it, and there was this other part of that whole area that we just never explored until the very end of the game in Mission 30, Skullface. We go do that. So that's where I think this Return to the Desert is going to come in. It may not be exactly a return to Mexico. It might be a return to Mexico, but it might be a return to some other desert. And I think this relates to those scenes that we've seen in the trailer of all of the red-clothed figures walking to the bridge, essentially. That's what I'm calling it. The big bridge in the desert is probably where the finale is going to take place. And that's kind of our metaphorical outer heaven, essentially, that Higgs is building for himself. His own kind of nation or whatever. And it's not really a nation. It's, it's probably more like he's trying to summon a portal to the beach or something like that, But it relates to, all of Big Boss's schemes in the Phantom Pain that I was talking about happening between 75 and 84 specifically. So anyways, and so not only is there this other area, like I've talked about with OKB-0, there's also Dekelia. There's also this hospital, right? And I've talked about how in the Phantom Pain, I think the Dekelia scenario relates to the New York stuff that happened with Zero in probably 75, late 75 or maybe early 76. And the whole, Zero's been attacked and the whole shell game that he put on and the submarines moving off the coast and all that stuff in those truth tapes. That kind of, I think, relates to all the New York scenario stuff that I've talked about in the Phantom Pains, the MGSV Explained Lecture Series, and how I think, when the mutiny happened and the helicopter crash happened, it was like Snake was kind of our, Frank Hunter, and the cause with him was Zero. And Zero was swapped out with a decoy, and then this decoy of Zero and Frank get another helicopter with Eva, and they go probably off to New York. And off in New York with Eva, that's probably where she's had Solidus, and she's been training him. And so that's where, what does this relate to in Death Stranding 2? Probably the stuff we've seen in the intro. That first trailer with, Fragile getting chased down and shot. Well, that nursery that she's in is kind of the hospital. The nursery for Luis is kind of the hospital. And the people coming in there and trying to kill her, or the person coming in there trying to kill her, maybe people, maybe person, we don't know. But that's kind of related to, Quiet coming to assassinate us in the Phantom Pain's prologue. And, I think Fragile being shot, kind of, if this happens in the prologue of Death Stranding 2, which I think it will, I think this relates to the whole idea of cutting Quiet from MGSV that I talked about, how if you don't bring Quiet onto the base for as long as possible and you beat everything that you can in the Phantom Pain without Quiet on the base, it kind of breaks open the game's story. And in all of the tapes and in even some of the cutscenes, they try to blame a bunch of stuff on Quiet, and it's like, well, dude, she's not even here. She hasn't been here the whole game, and they kind of can't explain it away because, well, they're lying to you, right? And so the way Fragile is kind of, let's say cut from the beginning of the game, I think relates to how quiet is supposed to be cut from the phantom pain, and how I've talked about that whole idea. So the nursery and Sam's, or wherever that place is that Luis is being kept, is kind of the hospital. So that means the person that's coming after her is kind of like the man on fire. It's also kind of like Quiet, but it's also kind of like the man on fire, because that's the one who's really chasing us through the hospital, and the one we're really terrified of, and the one who eventually does kind of, he does kind of get us a little bit. If you're, in that one part where you're in the hallway and he blows up all the soldiers, and you live through it, but you get shot, right? I think that's kind of relating to what's going on with Fragile, and why there's flames all around her when she wakes up on the beach with all the tar on her eye. And maybe she comes back to life in reality and everything around her is just burning, but it could be also that she's woken up on the beach. I'm not quite sure what they're showing us there, but I think the fire being around her relates back to the man on fire. And I think this is all, so this relates this character who comes after her to the man on fire, who's kind of the ghost of Naked Snake, a little bit, like I've said, kind of the ghost of Big Boss, but he also kind of isn't. He's Vulcan. He's quite literally someone else. So I think that kind of relates to maybe there's someone else in Fragile's past, maybe, who has some kind of relation to this character, possibly. Maybe some kind of a new Cliff. Maybe not Cliff again, but some kind of a new Cliff. This is kind of bounced around in my head while I've been saying all this. I didn't write it down anywhere. Maybe this is related to Fragile's father, actually. Maybe APAS is even related to Fragile's father, or maybe the leader of APAS and Fragile's father go back, or something like that, But yeah, so that's all the stuff with Man on Fire and the prologue, and this stuff with Fragile being shot in New York, and this baby she's taking care of is kind of like Eva taking care of Solidus, So yeah, there's all that context. I've talked about the parasite research. Oh, and then I also wanted to mention this. This is kind of the last thing. This return to the desert and this kind of bridge that they go back to, if it is somewhere in Mexico, the one place that popped into my mind was, I think I'm pronouncing this right, Tenochtitlan, the old Aztec capital of the Aztec Empire. But I also think that there might be a Mayan connection because of Quetzalcoatl and Mexico City and all that stuff. And the Mayan Empire was more over where modern-day Mexico City is, I believe. Oh, I may be getting that wrong. But the Aztec Empire was kind of north of where the Mayan Empire was. And that whole area, kind of relating back to Peace Walker and the Quetzal bird and Quetzalcoatl being related to all that stuff. Maybe there's kind of going to be some stuff, with Higgs's kind of religious stuff related to all of that. But yeah, basically I think Death Stranding 2 is going to be the 9 years that we missed from 75 to 84. That essentially, if you've been watching all of my MGSV Explained lectures and you've paid attention during all those, you probably already know the story of Death Stranding 2, if I'm right about this. It won't be like 100% the same story. Like I said, it's going to be based off of it, as if it's made sort of in the future. So all this stuff that's happened in the past is sort of being brought back up, right? But it's not really the thing happening again 100%. It's going to look real familiar, though, if you've paid attention, like I said, and you followed along. So yeah, that just this just struck. Like I said, y'all, this just struck me tonight. I've been thinking about Death Stranding 2 for quite a bit, and I know there's another trailer coming up, and I wanted to make this. The reason also I thought I got to make this now because literally a new Death Stranding 2 trailer I think is overdue. If you remember Death Stranding, the original had 3 trailers, 3 main big trailers that released. There was the first big one that released back in 2016 with Norman on the beach. The second one I always think of as the Dead Man one, or the Guillermo one with Guillermo del Toro, or Dead Man with BB on the war beach, and those scenes kind of being in the second one. And then there was a third one, and I can't remember what was in the third one. But that third trailer was the third one cut by Hideo. And then after that third one was released, there was a whole bunch of other trailers that came out, kind of the release trailers for all the publisher and all that kind of stuff. If he's going to do the same thing with Death Stranding 2, and it's coming out in 2025, and we're assuming it's probably not late 2025, well then let's get going. Time's ticking. You know, we got to get that third trailer released so that they can start releasing all of the stuff for the publisher and whatnot. So for Sony, you know, and I think it's 505 Games again. I'm not sure, but anyways, I think this, you know, we'll see what the new trailer has to show us. But I'm making this video now, hopefully as a good kind of way of showing that I maybe I do know what I'm talking about, you know. If I get some of this stuff right, y'all, I'm gonna freak out, because honestly, this has been a magical experience for me. I hope y'all felt some of it too. But with that, I think that's all I've got to say. Hope y'all have a good night. Peace.